Okay, so this is going to be a very quick one, but yet very useful when you need it. And what I want to show you with this one is how you can recenter the pivot point of a geometry when the pivot point is not in the perfect center of the geometry. So that's the kind of problem that you'll have when you model with the model builder of Nuke and bake a geometry in another node. What you'll have is a pivot point that is in the center of the scene and not in the center of the geometry. And that's also the kind of problem that you might have when you receive a geometry from another software. So this trick will allow you to fix both cases. So to show you what I mean, have this geometry that I've made inside the model builder. So I'll just select the geometry and select the selected geometry and bake it on its own geometry. So now we can delete the model builder, and if we take a look at the extracted geometry and go in the transform tab of this geo, you see that first the center point or the pivot point of this geometry is in the center of the scene and not in the center of the geometry here. So now if I rotate it, you see that it's rotating from the center of the scene. And the same is also true if we start to play a bit with the scaling of this geometry. So what I do to recenter this pivot point here in the center of the geometry is I go in the vertex selection here of the viewer. And this will allow you to select all the vertex of this geometry. So what we'll do is draw a rectangle to select all of the vertex. But if we take a look in the behind here, we see that we have some vertex that were not selected when we made our selection. And that's because if you want to also select the hidden vertex of this geometry, make sure to also select disable occlusion testing. So now you'll see all the vertex, even the one behind your geometry. So now you'll be able to draw your rectangle like that. But now you'll see that all the vertex of the geometry were selected. So once we have finished selecting all the vertex of the geometry, we'll just make a new axis node. And we'll use this axis node to use the matched selection position here. So by selecting all those vertex and using the match selection to position, you'll see that the axis, if we go back in node selection, is now in the center of this geometry. So now what we can do is expand the properties of our geometry and also show the axis. And all we have to do now, since we know that this axis was snapped to the center of this geometry, is drag the translate into the pivot point of our geometry. So now we can delete this axis since we don't need it anymore. But if we go back in our transform tab of this geometry, you see now that if I rotate this geometry, it's rotating in this by the center of it. And the same is also true for the scaling. So by just snapping all the vertex of this extracted geometry, we're able to make a selection and recenter an axis that will be in the center pivot point of this geometry. So use this trick if you play with the model builder and that you need to recenter the pivot, or that you have other geometry that for some reason the pivot point is not in the right place.